Hi, I'm Judith. I'm a Canadian and I'm over 80 years old. And I have this channel, Jam Today, Judith's Point of View, um, in order to talk about the things that I've learned in my life and to help you to live a happier, more fulfilling, more successful life. Um, and it's a labor of love. So if you like it, subscribe, like, and subscribe. Let me say that before I forget. So today I'm going to talk about decision making. This may be more than one video, I'm not sure. Because I got a lot to say about decision making. Because clearly the kind of life we create for ourselves is based upon the decisions that we make. And those decisions can be influenced very much by our beliefs about ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, the visions that we have about ourselves. I've talked about some of all of those factors before. But there's just there's an art of decision making, and I'm going to give you my view of it today. So, types of decisions. There are likely more than this, but I've boiled it down to three kinds of decisions. There are simple choices. What am I going to have for dinner tonight? Am I going to wear this jacket or that jacket? Fairly simple decisions, nothing too complex. Although if you've ever spent a few hours in your bedroom before an event trying on 4 or 5 different outfits, you'll know that it's not always the simplest decision in the world. But in the end, simple decisions. Second, and they don't have a lot of consequence. No little children are going to die of your decisions. 10 years from now, it's not going to matter. Even maybe by 24 hours from now, it's not going to matter. So those are simple decisions. Second are complicated decisions. Um, Not complicated, sorry, consequential. Let me get my notes there. Consequential decisions. Consequential decisions are decisions that are really going to affect your future. They're going to affect other people. They're going to affect the course that your life will take in some ways. Sometimes we make what we think are simple decisions and they turn out to be consequential, or vice versa. They're not usually so life changing that they can never be undone. The choice of a career, for instance, you can choose or the choice of what to take in university. They're big decisions, but if you take it, in many cases, whether you choose A or B may affect your life, but it's not going to be life threatening. It's not going to end your life. It may change your life or delay you for several years because you go down a wrong path or something, but it's not going to change your life forever. But there's more at stake. There is more at stake than there are from these simple decisions. So that's that. The third would be a conflicted decisions, and those I guess are complicated decisions, where there is no good answer, where you have a choice between A and B, and A has big risks and big detriments and big possibilities of loss, and B has big risks and big detriments and big possibilities of loss, or guilt. You're going to feel guilty if you do A, or you're going to feel guilty if you do B. Some decisions are just really conflicted decisions. Now, what may be a consequential decision for someone may be the same decision may be a conflicted decision for somebody else. I mean, just as in the way that some people find even simple decisions really difficult. They find them really they think they're really consequential, and they aren't, but they get really in conflict about them and worry. So trying to deal with those appropriately, those three kinds of decisions. So clearly, that's one, so you've got to think about what kind of decision is this? What category does it fit in for me? The second thing is, how long do I have to make this decision? How long is an appropriate amount of time to make this decision? Some decisions are you can make pretty fast. I mean, you make them within minutes or within hours or within days. And other decisions may take several months or years to come to. Um, and that can be appropriate to take a long time to make a decision. And I'll talk later about when you do it too fast, or when you do it too slowly, or don't do it at all, when you postpone doing it. Um, so yeah, so it can be, you have to think how long is an appropriate amount of time for this kind of decision. And that depends on what kind of decision it is, how much is at risk about it, and also maybe certain external factors. You may have a deadline. You have to apply to a certain course in college by a certain time. And if you don't, then you have to wait a year. That may be enough to spur you on to making the decision sooner rather than later. Or it may mean that you are willing to wait a year because you've got to get that right. So talk about that. And the other thing that really matters in decision making is, to what degree are you going to use your left brain, your rational fact finding brain, and to what degree are you going to use your right brain, your creative, emotional, your subconscious, your feelings about things, your intuitive sense, your gut instincts, to make this decision. And good decision making is a blend of both, I think, for the most part. Decisions made too impulsively, too much on right brain can be wonderful, and they can be horrible. Decisions made too much left brain, same thing. I mean, we've all had decisions likely where I certainly have, and I'm going to talk about some examples of these decisions in my life and in people who I've observed it close to me. So we have to try to balance those things. And there may be more thinking on this, but I think those are the main things. What kind of decision is it? What's an appropriate amount of time to spend on this decision? And how do I balance right brain and left brain facts versus feelings about that? How do I come out? And then I guess the last thing is, how do I know when I've made a good decision, or and sometimes you don't know until the outcome, but how do I get to the point? How do I know when the decision feels, yes, this is the right decision to make and I'm going to move forward? I'll talk about that last thing right now. I don't know if that's the right order or not, but I'll talk about that now while I'm thinking about it. For me, there is a sense when I come to a decision. I'm talking about a fairly major decision. If it's what I'm going to have for dinner, it's like not a big deal. But I don't really have to think about it until it's right. I just choose something and we'll go on from there. There will be another meal in a few hours. But if it's a consequential decision, do we buy this house, right? Looking for a house. Is this a house we should put in an offer on, right? You can see this if you watch Location, 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 which is one of my favorite UK programs, where people come to that point. And often in buying a house, you're looking at the right brain stuff. Someone's very analytical. One of you in your partnership is very analytical. Sometimes you're very emotional. It's all about the feel of the house. You need to have both. So how do you know when it's right? For me, there is a kind of a thunk that happens at the pit of my stomach. It doesn't happen in my brain. It happens at the pit of my stomach when it feels like something solid lands at the bottom there, and it just sits there, and it's fine. So let's talk about some decisions of my life and other people's lives. So, okay, I'm not going to talk too much about simple decisions, except to say, don't agonize over them too much. I can agonize, especially if I get too hungry. I can really agonize over what I'm going to eat. If I'm too hungry, I get to the point where I don't know what I want to eat, and I can't think of what I want to eat, but it's got to be something absolutely perfect. And I don't know. And in the olden days, I used to go grazing over food, trying to find the right combination of food. I would eat this, and then I would have a bit of that, and then I would have a bit of something else, and a bit of something else, because nothing was right, and that didn't work out well either. Now I pick something. Sometimes I pick the healthier choice, and I don't really enjoy it. I had that happen a couple of weeks ago at a restaurant where I chose the, I don't know, chicken clubs, the turkey club sandwich or something, and I thought it was you know, and I chose that because I really wanted a hamburger, but I couldn't take half home. You know, a hamburger you can't really take half home, and I knew I wouldn't eat the whole thing, and I should have just ordered the hamburger and left the rest. Um, but it's no big deal. Like it's one meal. Oh, who cares? So I didn't love it. The turkey club sandwich, I didn't love it. I did bring the other half home. I did eat the other half eventually. No, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't, it didn't schmack. It didn't make me feel all wonderful inside. Okay, so try not to spend too much time on those decisions. I don't like the I don't like saying about things it'll do. When I buy things, I don't want to say, oh, it'll do. But when it comes sometimes to some of those simple decisions, it'll do is just fine, you know? Um, those are often about personal choice. They're not a lot about rationale. Sometimes I'm balancing a healthy choice versus what I would really like to eat, versus what would be good for my body versus what my tongue really wants, French fries or, you know, steamed vegetables. Sometimes French fries win, and sometimes that's good. And sometimes they win, and then afterwards I think, oh, not the best choice. So we're going to make those decisions. We're going to make them all the time. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. Oh, well. Try to learn from them and move on. Next time I won't order that turkey club in that particular restaurant. Okay, consequential choices. I'm going to talk about, I guess, the most consequential choice, or one of the most consequential choices I've ever been faced with in my life. We made a few, like in connection, my husband and I made a few, like buying a house, going to live in France for a couple of years, like giving up our job, not our jobs, but our work, our income sources, and going to live in France for a couple of years. We thought it was only going to be one. It lasted for two, staying longer than we planned. Those are consequential choices with big consequences. The biggest one I faced was that in 1991, I was diagnosed with an acoustic neuroma. That is a benign tumor on the balance nerve between the ear and the brain. It's always benign. It's slow growing. I had actually had symptoms from 1982. I got my first symptoms in 1982. So it was 9 years, over 9 years, because it was the spring of 1982 when I had the first symptoms. I started feeling dizzy. And then over the years, I had a number of symptoms. I had all kinds of tests. I had doctors telling me I was wasting the government's time, the government money for health insurance, time looking for the problem. I started going deaf in one ear, but I had a lot of balance problems. So in 1991, there I was. And I'm going to tell this story again another time, coming at it from a different perspective. But this time I'll keep it simple. So I knew I had this tumor, and I knew I had to do something about it. We decided to watch it for a bit, and meanwhile I was researching things. I had found the Acoustic Neuroma Association of Canada. The surgeon had told me about that. Or it wasn't a surgeon, actually. It was a ear, nose, and throat doctor, I think, but who told me I had this. And his thing was that I needed to have surgery. Now, as it happened, I had another surgery that had to happen first on a different subject, and that's the subject of a whole different story and a whole different set of events, and why I'm grateful now that it turned out as it did. But anyway, I started looking into. I had some time because I had this other surgery. I had to recover from it first, so I had some time to do some research. I didn't just say, as I likely would have otherwise, say to the doctor, oh, okay, I need to have this operated on, and you're going to cut into my skull and cut it out, and whatever. I started researching, and I discovered that there were all kinds of downsides to this. Um, yes, it would be cut out, and the possibility would be that they would be able to get it all, but maybe not. I might be left totally deaf in that ear. I might end up with, some people ended up with real physical problems where their, face was droopy like this all the way down this side. Um, I was a freelance person. I did corporate training at that point, and I knew that if I had that kind of deformity, if I ended up with that kind of a thing, it was going to be very, very hard to get work. Um, it's a sad thing, but people don't like looking at people who are not physically perfect, you know, together, who have big injuries, and they think it gives you a mental impairment in some way. I didn't want to be suddenly deaf. The possibility of debilitating headaches for 10 years. Meanwhile, there was this other treatment that someone had gone to that was not really, our medical health insurance system didn't like it, but they had paid for a few, which was a kind of radiation called gamma knife radiation, and it was offered in Stockholm, Sweden, where it was invented at Karolinska Hospital. It was also in all kinds of other countries in Europe. It was the treatment of choice in Europe for this kind of tumor. There were, I think at that time, 3 places where it had been brought to the United States, just brand new places in the United States. And so I researched and researched. I found, what happened was I found an article by someone who had had gamma knife surgery in Karolinska and a hospital in Sweden, and she lived not far from me, and I got in touch with her, and she gave me all her research, and I poured over that as I was recovering from this other operation, and I talked to my doctor about it, who said, oh, radiation. Oh, well, if you really want radiation, we have a kind of radiation here in Canada. It's just operated by radiologists instead of doctors. You could have it. And I said, how many people have you treated with acoustic neuroma? Well, the answer was 9, but 2 died. No, I want the one where thousands of people have had it, and they're still having it, and it works. There was a chance that a really good likelihood I wouldn't have any facial deformities, that I certainly wouldn't have my skull cut into, so I likely wouldn't have the headaches. There were some dangers. There was a possibility of gradually losing my hearing over a few years. Anyway, I fought to have that. I decided, it became really clear to me fairly fast that that was the solution that I wanted. That was the treatment I wanted. I then had made my decision. I then had to implement the decision, which is a whole nother story about fighting with OHIP and finding a doctor and that would recommend it, and taking money out of the mortgage to do it because OHIP wouldn't pay for it, and fighting OHIP afterwards, and so on. There's a long story there. But the end result was that, yes, that I did go to Karolinska Hospital, and I had 10 minutes of radiation, and one day I was there for a whole day from 7 in the morning till about 7 at night. And 8 o'clock that night, we were sitting out at an outdoor restaurant at Karolinska. I had a little Band-Aid here, a couple of other places where they had screwed stuff into my head. I had my treatment, and I was good to go. And I've been good to go ever since. I did get deaf in this year. There were some consequences that I had hoped wouldn't happen. I have no balance on this side of my head between the radiation and the tumor. So I've got one-sided balance and one-sided hearing. But that was a decision that just resonated for me. With every fiber of my being. And the more I researched, the more I looked into both, and I did research. I didn't just choose one. But the more I researched, the more I said, yes, gamma knife radiology is the one for me. And I had a big fight in order to implement that decision. But I did. That was a decision that I have never regretted. Never regretted. Now, it wasn't life or death. I mean, you could die from that tumor if you didn't treat it. But if I had had surgery, I would have lived too. So it wasn't a life or death decision. I just didn't want to take the risks of that. And many people have the surgery and they're fine, they recover fine, and many others do not. So there we go. I knew for me what was the right decision, and I'm really happy that I made that decision. Another example of a consequential decision. I'm helping my grandson. I hope I'm helping him anyway. I'm not sure. Because I kind of offered my help. He didn't really ask for it. Um, so I have a grandson who's in his early 20s, and he's the youngest of my three grandchildren, and they're step grandchildren, of course, because I've mentioned I have stepkids, but there's no difference when it comes to your grandkids. I've been around them since they were born, and I've known their mother since she was 5, and I just love them like they're my own. Um, so he has wanted to be a pilot since he was 16 or 17, and his dad bought him a sample flight where you could go and you could sit up by the pilot seat and they would show you how to fly and let you fly for a second, hold the controls for a second. That's all he's wanted to be as a pilot. And he finished high school during the pandemic, and so he wasn't working for a few years because of the pandemic. It was hard and he didn't know what to do, and he wasn't going to go on to something else at that point. He didn't want to go to university or college. And now he's getting into toward his middle 20s, and there have been a few years since high school, several years since high school, and he's working in retail in a store, and he's earning money, and he's paying for his own flying lessons. He's still living at home with his mom. He's paying for his flying lessons, and that's good, but it's a very, very slow way to become a pilot. And so I have been helping to counsel him a bit to help him maybe look at some other options that would get him there faster. It's a really big decision for him, and it's not something I don't think that he's ever thought about. He hasn't researched, and I don't think he's ever been taught to research on how to research. So we talk once a month. I'm trying not to be too pressureful about this, and we talk once a month, and I keep reminding him that this is always going to be his choice, that I just want him to make a really good decision for himself, because I don't want him in midlife to say, oh, I was going along this path, I didn't know there were alternatives, and then I got distracted because I fell in love and I got married, or because I decided to do something else for a living to make more money, or whatever it was. Whatever happens in life that gets you off the path when you're on a 15 years or more to become a pilot, when you could maybe do it in 4 if you could manage to pay the fees, which is the big issue, and be willing to do the work. He's very smart. I think he can do the work, and there are colleges he can go to, and there are other things he could do. He could join the armed forces. I don't think that's an option that he would consider, for various reasons, but I'm just trying to help him, see those options and do the research. So it is. So I'm talking to him a lot about a visualization, because that's really important. Visualization. I've talked about that in other videos. I think it's episode 5 or so. Is about visualization. I'll likely talk about it again. It's the thing that helped me the most in my whole life get what I wanted in life, and I use visualization in getting once I'd made the decision about Gamma Knife and getting to go and have it. But using visualization, I think the first time I talked to him about it, kind of went over his head. I was like, oh, Grandma Juju is talking about some weird thing, that I don't even know. It just sounds very woo-woo. But I've talked to him more about him. I hope that he's doing it. I've talked about affirmations. So I've talked about the right brain side of things. But I've also talked to him about the left brain side of things, encouraging him to reach out to people to pilots. He did through his aunt, my other daughter, get to talk to someone who is a pilot and who loves to mentor young people, who gave him lots of good suggestions. I'm trying to follow up with some of those suggestions and encourage him to actually take action on them, to step a little out of his comfort zone, to go to a meeting where pilots gather, And he said, but I don't know what to say. I mean, I don't know anything. And I said, it doesn't matter if you don't know anything. If they ask you why you're there, you say, well, you're pilots and I want to be a pilot. So give me your advice on becoming a pilot, and they'll be happy to tell you. And if they're not, then don't go back to that meeting, It's really easy. So consequential decisions, that is a really consequential decision for him, and he has a certain amount of time. We've agreed he's not going to try to make that decision within 3 or 4 or 5 months. It would be likely more like in a year and a half, and that should give us enough time. But if it stretches on 2 years or 3 years, that is not So he's going to go ahead to get his private pilot's license, and meanwhile he's going to be investigating these other ways. And I hope he finds a faster way. But if he doesn't, that's okay. Then at least he's making an informed decision based on himself. And if he's 45 and he became a pilot, but he said, "Oh, I should have done it the faster way," or he's 45 and he never became the kind of commercial pilot, professional pilot he wants to be, he will understand why, and he will know that he in fact, it was a matter of his decisions and his choices, but he won't say, "I just didn't even know I had a choice." And I think that that's what's really important, to know that you have a choice, to know that you can make a decision, that you can find a way forward. And then whatever he chooses, it's good. I'll support him in that. I'll help him all I can. Conflicted, complicated choices. Well, conflicted, complicated choices. I don't think I have ever actually had to make one of those, if I think about it. I have not. But choosing, for instance, to leave a marriage, I would think is a conflicted or complicated choice. It may not always be. It may be a really clear choice, but can be a really conflicted or complicated choice. Deciding whether or not to have an abortion. Deciding whether your partner who has dementia, or your parent who has some dementia, or is just getting older, whatever, needs to go into some kind of care, or can be cared for at home, or what kind of care they should have. Those can be complicated choices because they're filled with grief, whatever choice is made, because they may have guilt, whatever choice is made, because they may have moral implications, a sense of duty, a conflict in your sense of duties, a conflict in your loyalties, a conflict. They're conflicted choices, and they're difficult. And what is a difficult choice for one person may not be a really difficult choice for someone else. So let's get that straight. But yeah, complicated choices. And on those, I guess another kind of complicated choice I'd include is when you want one thing and your partner wants something different. Dan and I did have one of those. It got resolved in a way I didn't really love. So I'll talk about that one. I was, late 50s, early 60s. He was 3 years older, so early 60s. I was coming up to 60, and we were talking about what we were going to do about retirement. And we had paid off our house, and house in Toronto, and we were both working as freelancers. We come back from, well, actually, he wasn't working. He didn't work the last 13 years of our life. He was a house husband, and I was working. We were, that's a whole other story. We were talking about what to do with retirement. We had gone to France in 2005, in the spring of 2005, looking to see, because we had lived in France for 2 years, in 93 to 95, and we loved it there. And we went over to see if there were other areas of France that were cheaper than the area we had lived, which was the back country at the Côte d'Azur, to see if we could maybe move there. Could we move there? And we came back convinced that the cost financially was going to be too and the complication was going to be too high. I mean, stupid things like if we moved there permanently, our RRSPs would be taxed on the day we left the country. They would be taxed. They would have to be dissolved and taxed in full, and all that money, half of it would go to the government. We didn't want that. It was things like that. So we came back thinking, no, we weren't going to do that. We would instead just try to spend winters in France, in the south of France, in the part that we really loved, where we could perhaps rent a place that they rented out for high amounts in the summer. When it was really high season, we could rent in the winter when it was a little cooler but not cold like Canada. But meanwhile, we had this house in Toronto that was worth a lot of money, and we were going to need the money from that house to fund a retirement. And so we needed to buy something somewhere outside the city. Where were we going to buy? And I wanted to move, we were in Toronto, and I wanted to move east toward Cobourg or Port Hope or one of those towns because his daughters were that way, and because it was closer to where I had grown up, where he didn't want to move to my hometown where I live now. And so that was out, but I wanted to move more that way. And he wanted to move west, actually, to the Niagara region for a number of reasons. And I didn't really want to move there. I thought it was too far from the kids. And he said, well, the kids can move and so on. So we really disagreed. And we weren't fighting about it. We just didn't know what to do. And so I said to him on that, we'll just have to keep praying about what the right decision is. We'll have to keep praying. That was in May of 2005. In July, on July 4th of 2005, he died of a sudden heart attack. So that decision got made for us. I just said, God will show us what we need to do. And I don't think he died in order to solve that dilemma or anything. I don't think that God went, oh gosh, they've got a dilemma. I think I'll just make him die. But that decision got made for us, and not in a way that I had expected. So that was a complicated decision that we were spared from making, in a sense. And then it was an easier decision for me years later, about 5 years later, no, 7 years later, to move back to my hometown. So, but it gives you an example of a complicated decision. If you've got a decision for two of you, and between husband and wife, and you're trying to work it out and you can't come to a conclusion, sometimes you have to wait a little longer and let things get a little clearer and pray a little harder. Prayer is helpful to say, show us a way. And if you're not a praying person, then to trust that in some way the universe will show you a way. Hopefully not the way that this one ended. Okay, this is getting long, so I'm going to quit here. I'm going to come back to this thing about decisions another time to talk about right brain versus left brain feelings, impulsive decisions, rational decisions, how to find the balance between those, because I've got some things to say about that too. But I think this is enough about types of decisions and some general advice about and examples of different kinds of decisions. So until the next time, try to make good decisions. You know that this is the way to create a happy and successful life, but keep visualizing, keep thinking, keep dreaming about what you want, and I'll see you on the next one.